Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Chaitanyam Sarvagam Sarvam Sarvaguhatavashayam Yat Sarva Vishayatitam Tasmai Sarvavide Namaha. Om. Good. Nice to see you all today. Nice to have our many students returning for our online version of this class. We continue our study of chapter 14. We've just concluded a very important topic, the topic dealing with the nature of ignorance, and we went into it in some detail. We described that ignorance has a power of covering, called avarana shakti, and projecting, vikshepa shakti. In the dark alley, the rope is obscured and the snake is projected. And then the same thing Shankara used, he applied it to Maya. Maya is also a Shakti. Certainly has that. It has also the covering and projecting. Covering means Brahman, the underlying reality because of which everything exists, is covered, as it were. Notice, is the clay covered? The clay is not covered. Brahman is covered. That's Maya Shakti. And then, of course, the universe is projected. And we saw the comparison, Vyashti, Sameshti. We're not going to go back, but I just wanted to have you recall those topics in your mind, just to refresh it a little bit before we set it aside. It may come back in the future, but for now, we now turn to a new topic. And that topic is, how is it possible to know Atma, the so-called supreme reality, directly? And there's a short answer to that, which most of you already know, and that is, Atma can only, notice my choice of words here, Atma can only be known directly if it's not remote. You get it? If Atma really is remote, forget it. How can you know anything remote directly? I'm remote for you. Do you know me directly? There are at least two kinds of indirectness involved. First kind of indirectness is physical. Second is inside you have this complex mechanism with your eyeball and optic nerve and brain and all of that. So there's no way you will know me directly. You know me indirectly through your senses, through this whole process. If Atma is in any way distant or remote, like my body is remote from you, it's absolutely impossible to know directly. So Atma can only be known directly if it's already immediately present in your experience, but not recognized, being covered, as it were, by that so-called veil of ignorance. So that's the short answer, and Shankara is going to give a much more elaborate answer, including some Purva Paksha Siddhanta. Remember this technique used, Purva Paksha to introduce opposing points of view, and Siddhanta to negate those opposing points of view. So we'll see Shankara using that technique right here. Next verse, not this verse. Introducing the technique. Shankara says, Sakshadeva savigneyaha, Sakshadeva savigneyaha, Sakshadatmeti cha shrutehe, Sakshadatmeti cha shrutehe, Bhidyate hridaya granthir, Bhidyate hridaya granthir, Na chedityadita shrutehe, Na chedityadita shrutehe. Saha Vigneyaha. Saha, that Atma, Vigneyaha, is to be known how? Sakshat eva, directly. Sakshat. And then he gives some support for that statement. In what sense? How? Actually, that's really the question. How? And he begins, look where he begins. Sakshat atma iti cha shrutehe. Is that working okay? Okay. Shrutehe, from the scriptures, we have the statement, Sakshat atma iti. This is a quote from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. And the full statement is, Sakshat aparokshat brahma yaha atma sarvantaraha. That means is that yaha atma, that which is atma, which is sarva antaraha, within us all, that atma is Brahman, but not some kind of remote Brahman. It is sakshat, immediately present, and aparokshat. Remember, we used that word aparoksha in the last several classes. Actually, it's in the Uddhava Gita classes we've been using that term, I think. So paroksha means that which is known indirectly, like the presence of my body here. Aparoksha is that which is known directly, immediately. What is known right now, what is known directly and immediately to you? Well, one thing we can certainly say is whatever is happening in your mind is known without something intervening between you and your thoughts. What is it between you and me are your eyeballs and distance. What is the distance between you and your thoughts? You, the conscious observer, and your thoughts, zero distance. And what is the mediator between you and your thoughts? Okay, so that, by the way, there's more complexity lurking here, and we'll see that in a moment. But it's a good starting point to understand what does it mean to know something directly. Do you have to think about it? Do I know what's happening in my mind? You don't even have to think. It's already known to you. So that's a good starting point for what we mean by sakshat. So notice in these 3 lines, I think this is very clever on the part of Shankaracharya, that in the second, third, and fourth lines, he actually gives a sequence about how Atma is to be known. First of all, Atma is to be known directly through a process of self-inquiry. This has been one of our main, it is our main topic. It's what we do here every Sunday. We're all engaged in a process of self-inquiry. But that process of self-inquiry requires guidance. Where is that guidance? Scripture. So of course everything Shankara teaches is based on scripture, including that passage of the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. Sakshat Atma. Atma is to be known directly. Atma is immediately present. Then step 2. So you use the scriptures to guide your process of self-inquiry. That's line 2 here. Line 3, Bhidyate Hridaya Grantihi. Shankara is in the mood for quoting scripture here. This is a quote from the Mundaka Upanishad. Hridaya Granti is a nice term for ignorance. The Granti, the knot of your Hridaya heart. It's very figurative, poetic almost. The knots of the heart, Bhidyate, are severed. Actually, it's singular. The knot of the heart is Vidyate, severed. So that knot, by the way, you've had a problem when you've had a knot that's really knotty. Knotted, hard to undo. Well, that's a little bit, that's why that idea of knot is given here. It's given not by Shankara, it's given actually by the great rishi from whom this Mundaka Upanishad comes. So step one is self-inquiry guided by scripture. Self two is the removal of that ignorance. What is step three? I know there's one more line here, but that one more line is actually not how. It's more like the consequences of not doing it. The third line is last line is also a quotation from scripture. Nachet. Nachet, this is Kena Upanishad. And he says, Nachet, if you don't get it, if you don't discover your true nature as sat-chit-ananda atma, that inner divinity, then mahati vinashtihi, your loss is tremendous. If you how to put it? If you lose, how would that work? If you lose the PIN number for your bank account, you no longer have access to that bank account. How much do you lose? Could be a lot, depending on what you've got in the bank. But that's if you lose your PIN number. How about if you lose yourself? Everything is lost. And that is the sense of this statement from the Kena Upanishad. Failing to discover your true nature, failing to discover yourself, the loss is immense. Mahati vinashtihi. Notice though the final line here is not a step in this how. The first step, self-inquiry guided by scriptures. Second step, removing ignorance. And then I asked you what was the third step. This isn't the third step. So I'm now going to ask you a quick trick question, and you don't have to respond. In fact, please don't respond. You get in trouble. So the trick question is, what is the third step? So first, self-inquiry guided by the scriptures. Second, removal of ignorance. And what is the third step? Some of you have figured it out. There ain't no third step. That's why it's a trick question. Once you remove ignorance of the rope, you see the rope. Once you remove ignorance covering the self, you get it. That's what it is. Removal of ignorance. We've observed many times that, and this is an interesting way of putting it, Vedanta gives you nothing. The purpose of Vedanta is to remove something, to remove ignorance. You already are that which you want to become, to quote my guru's words. So, because Atma is already immediately present, step two is the end of the road. Hey, it sounds very simple. Two steps. Self-inquiry guided by scriptures, followed by removal of ignorance. In theory, it is that simple. In practice, that's another matter entirely. So this is Shankaracharya's introduction to this next topic. And now he wants to develop this topic, and he does so by introducing an opposing point of view, Purva Paksha, the opposing point of view, and he does so in the next verse. Ashabdadivato nasya, ashabdadivato nasya, grahanam chendriyar bhavet, grahanam chendriyar bhavet, sukharibhyasthatanyatvat, sukharistvatanyatvat, buddhya vapikatam bhavet, buddhya vapikatam bhavet. So he doesn't tell you it's the Purva Pakshi speaking here, which is why the translator, me, puts in that word objection. And what is the objection? He says, end of the first line, you have to break apart, na asya. Asya, for that atma, the atma which you claim, this is a Purva Pakshi speaking, the objector. Asya, for the atma that you claim is immediately present, he says that atma ashabdadi tvataha, because that atma has no material nature. So shabda is one of the 5 elements. And so he's making the point, atma is not perceptible by any of your 5 sense organs. Shabda in ancient worldview is what is the element that comes to your ears. I don't want to explain this. It's all very archaic and arcane, very obscure, so we need not go through it. But what we can say is all the elements are perceived by your 5 senses. Sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Everything you know about the world is known through these 5 senses. And which of the 5 senses can you use to know Atma? Can you see it? Hear it? Feel it? Taste it? What does Atma smell like? You get the point. It's not a material thing. Therefore, it is not accessible to the 5 senses. Of course, that would, and that's what he says. He says, ashabdadi tvataha, because Atma has no material nature, na asya grahanam, it cannot be grasped, grahanam. Cha indriyaihi, by the indriyas, by the senses, na bhavet, it cannot be grasped by the senses. So then, of course, the next step of our argument, and it's meant to be an argument, a series of logical steps. So if it can't be grasped by the senses, maybe it can be grasped by the mind. We've pointed out many times that the mind is actually considered to be the 6th sense. It's called anta-karana. Karana means sense organ. So you got 5 karanas, 5 sense organs, which are pointed outwards. You have 1 sense organ, anta-karana, which is pointed inwards. That's called mind, anta-karana in Sanskrit. And here we're not making all the distinctions, manas, buddhi, chitta, and all of that. It's not helpful, it's not necessary. So we just call it mind, or buddhi. Shankara is going to use the word. But there's no distinctions being made here. So then, if Atma cannot be known through the 5 senses, maybe Atma can be known through the mind. Well, the objector says, that ain't happening either. He says, Sukadi byaha tata anyatvat. Tata. And anyatvat, because Atma is unlike sukadibhyaha, is unlike experiences like happiness, etc. When happiness is present in your mind, it's known to you. When sadness is present in your mind, it's known to you. When the image of Swami Taratmananda is present in your mind, known to you. When the sound of my voice is present in your mind, known to you. So things that come from your senses, like my image and my voice, are known to you. Things that come purely from your mind, notice that sukha and dukkha, happiness and suffering, don't come from outside. My image comes from outside. Sukha and dukkha are not coming from outside. They're coming from inside. They arise in your mind without help from your 5 senses. So happiness is known to you when it's in the mind. Sadness is known to you in the mind. Try this. have some fun with this. Atma is all-pervasive. We've established in prior classes. We won't. Actually, Shankara will also refer to that in the next verse. So you can't, actually set that aside. We don't even need it. Is consciousness present in your mind or not? We can skip that whole all-pervasive thing. Is consciousness present in your mind? It has to be, otherwise, how would you know? How would you know the image of me and sound of my voice in your mind? How would you know sadness and happiness in your mind? Consciousness is present in your mind. And it's not remote. So happiness in your mind is known to you. Sadness in your mind is known to you. Consciousness in your mind is, oops. I'm doing that quite deliberately. So you don't know consciousness like other things in your mind. And that's what he says. He says here, buddhyava api katam bhavet. And katam, how, buddhya, and you have to connect that to grahanam, up above. Then how if, since, let me paraphrase the last half, since Atma is unlike happiness, etc., which are known to you when you're in your mind, when they're in your mind. Consciousness is present in your mind, but it's not known to you in the same way as sadness, etc. So, katam grahanam buddhya bhavet. Then how can Atma be understood or discovered buddhya, by your mind, by your buddhi, by your intellect? Pretty good argument. Happiness and sadness, when they're present in your mind, known to you. Consciousness, when it's present in your mind, not known to you. Of course, I hope you can answer this based on our prior classes. You can answer the question why. Happiness is not known to you as a material object, nor is happiness known to you as a mental object. Material object, image of me in your mind, anything picked up by your five senses, material objects are known to you. And happiness and sadness, let's call them mental objects. We call them vrittis, any kind of activity in your mind, including thoughts, cognitions. Thoughts are known to you. Emotions are known to you. And perceptions, which your senses pick up, all of these are known to you. All of these objects are known to you. All of these objects are present in your mind and known to you. Why isn't Atma known to you? And I'll rephrase the question so you'll get it. All these objects are not known to you. Why is Atma not known to you? Because it's not an object. I'll say that again. All these objects are known to you. If Atma were an object, it would be known to you. Atma is not an object, it's you, the conscious observer. So that's the logic behind Shankara's statement here. And now, in the next verse, Shankara then replies to this opposing point of view. Adrishyo piyata rahush, adrishyo piyata rahush, chandre bimbam yatambasi, chandre bimbam yatambasi, sarvagopi tataivatma, sarvagopi tataivatma, buddhaveva sagrihyate, buddhaveva sagrihyate. Start in the second half. Sarvagaha api tata eva atma. Tata, in this way, eva, indeed, atma api. Even though Atma is sarvagaha, I've said before, all-pervasive. And the point of all-pervasive is it's a big word, and we need not get into all the details. It's enough to say that it's in your mind. It's not separate from your mind. Atma must necessarily be present in your mind. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what's happening in your mind. Shankara points out by saying sarvagaha, Shankara corrects my statement a little bit. Because do you see the incorrectness of my statement? Not incorrect, it's simplified, dumbed down, so to speak. Not that you need anything to be dumbed down. But when I say consciousness is in your mind, some of you could correct me. And said, Swamiji, didn't you say your mind is in consciousness? Right? Consciousness is not stuck somehow inside your mind any more than space is stuck inside this room. Space is in a room, but room is in space. Consciousness is in your mind, but mind is in consciousness. That's why Shankara uses this word sarvagaha. So it's important logic, but set it aside. Just understand, consciousness is in your mind, and therefore Shankara says, buddhau eva sagrihyate, and that saha atma, that atma grihyate, can be discovered, literally grasped, but tricky. Not grasped as an object, and we'll see that in the first half. Atma can be discovered, can be realized, can be recognized. Buddhau eva, I have to break apart those words, in your mind. Atma can, since Atma is present in your mind, it can be recognized in your mind. You couldn't recognize it in your mind if it were absent from your mind, and it can't possibly be absent from your mind. It's available for discovery. How? And in the first line, first half, Shankara gives, there are many approaches to this question. And Shankara here is going to use logic. This is unusual. Not unusual. Generally, we discuss consciousness as being self-evident. What do you need to do to know that you are conscious? You already know. You don't need Vedanta to tell you that you're a conscious being. You certainly don't need me to tell you that you're a conscious being. It is a self-evident, self-revealing fact, a fact of your present experience. This truth is present in your experience right now. So really speaking, it's a matter of anubhava, your experience, and properly understanding that anubhava, that experience. That's the conventional way of understanding that Atma is available to be grasped metaphorically in your mind right now. It is immediately present in your mind right now. But Shankara here is very cleverly going to use a particular kind of logic. Several classes ago, we had talked about these 6 different pramanas, 6 different means of knowledge, and you remember that anumana, inference, is broken down by Vedanta into different kinds of inference, one of which is arthapatti, inference. How would we say? Presumption would be a good. By the way, if you forgot all that, don't worry. It's a technical subject. It's not necessary. But if you do happen to remember it, I just want to make the connection for you. So he's going to use a particular kind of reasoning here. And he gives 2 examples using this reasoning. He says, first example is about Rahu. Rahu, here we go again. We know about eclipses, how the moon is eclipsed when the earth comes in between, how the sun gets eclipsed when the earth gets in between, when the moon gets in between. So we know something about eclipses, and we've known something about eclipses for several, I don't know if, was it known before Galileo and all of that? I'm not even sure. But anyway, we understand quite a bit about celestial mechanics for hundreds of years. Apparently, the ancient rishis didn't study the works of Newton. I'm making a bad joke. So we're now 2,000 years ahead or behind Newton. So this pre-scientific culture from which these teachings come, they understood many things. They apparently missed out on this fact. I mean, they could have, I think. They had the science, they had the math, they had the reasoning to figure out what an eclipse was. Apparently they didn't. Because, or maybe some did, but mainstream ancient culture held that eclipses took place. An eclipse of the moon take place not when the Earth's shadow fell on the moon, but when a deity known as Rahu, who is not exactly invisible. How about pitch black? A pitch black deity in the dark skies. You can't see until that deity, poetically they say, Rahu consumes the moon, which is a little far-fetched, but that's the mythology of ancient times. Rahu is a deity who consumes the moon and apparently regurgitates it later. I think a more plausible explanation is Rahu covers the moon. So they didn't get it that the Earth was covering the moon, so they thought this deity called Rahu partially covers the moon. Now, when you see the eclipse, you look up there and you see the arc of the shadow. Do you see Rahu? Obviously not, because Rahu is an ancient worldview. Do you see the Earth? You don't see the Earth. You're standing on the Earth. You see a shadow. But that shadow establishes the existence of Rahu in ancient times. That shadow exists, the existence of the Earth in modern times. People ask, what are these how to know what shape the Earth is? Hey, doesn't that shadow tell you something about the Earth? Notice you don't see the Earth directly, but that shadow indirectly tells you something about Earth. In the same way, observing mental objects, vrittis. You observe, for example, right now you're observing the image of me in your mind. Do you observe consciousness? No. But your observation of me, the image of me in your mind, tells you something, implies something about consciousness. Not that you see consciousness directly, but seeing the image in your mind indirectly tells you something about the nature of consciousness. What is that? The image of me in your mind has a property we'll call knownness. It's known to you. Now, here's... Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself. This is really for the next verse. set knownness aside. We'll get to, that's really the next verse, and I don't want to confuse it right now. Observing the shadow on the moon tells you something about Rahu in ancient times, tells you something about the curvature of the Earth's surface in modern times. So indirectly you come to know. We can say then that the moon is a locus for making this discovery. Not that it's what you discover, but it gives you something to observe. We'll say then it is the locus of discovery. By the way, we're getting more metaphors. The next metaphor he gives is in addition, so he says, adrishyaha api yatha rahuhu, yatha just as Rahu, as we explained, is adrishyaha api. Even though you can't see Rahu, either it is a deity, which is non-physical, who is eating the moon, or it is pure black and it covers the moon. You can't see it. Or it's the earth, and you don't, when you look at the eclipse, you don't see the earth, but you know something about it. Second example is Chandre bimbam yatha ambasi. Second example, yatha when Chandre, when the moon, ambasi, in water, is bimbam, bimbitam, reflected. When you see this moon reflected in the water, you've all, maybe at the side of a lake, how beautiful it is when the moon is rising above the still lake, and you see that moon beautifully reflected. You may see some ripples. It's a lovely sight. Tell me, you're looking at that reflection. Do you see the moon? You're looking at a reflection. You're not looking up at the moon. You're looking at the reflection. But does that reflection tell you something about the moon? Tells you a lot. Tells you that it's round. Tells you that it's bright. Tells you that it has a mottled surface, some dark, some bright spots. You're not looking at the moon, but looking at the moon in the water tells you something about the moon. Another metaphor for seeing the thoughts in your mind, observing thoughts in your mind. You don't observe consciousness, but observing the thoughts in your mind tells you something about consciousness. And that's what we're going to see in the next verse. Yeah, better we hold off into the, actually, better I should tell you right now. Stay with the moon. The moon is shining. You see its shining nature reflected in the water. In the same way, when you experience a thought in your mind, that thought is visible to you. Visible to you, think of, and this is really, again, overlapping with the next verse. This is a very challenging question I'm going to pose to you. How do you know thoughts in your mind? And it turns out to be a surprisingly complex topic. Excuse me. Right now, the image of me is present in your mind. How do you know that? What we do know is, according to neuroscience, is that the end product of the function of your eyes and your brain, the end product of that all that complex system is an image arises in your mind. If you ask a neuroscience exactly how that happens, the neuroscience will say, well, we haven't figured that out yet, because it's that complicated. even with all of our resources. They're really intensely trying to understand how that works, and they don't fully understand how it works. But what does your experience tell you? Do you have to be a neuroscientist to know that the image of me received by your eyeballs is present in your mind? You don't need neuroscience to know that. It's an obvious fact in your experience. So now the image arises as a mental object. So now the question is, how is that mental object known? Well, here we can stay with our metaphor. The physical object out here is known to you because of the fact that it's illumined by light. If we were sitting in a pitch dark room, if it were night time and all the lights were turned off, would you, in your mind, would there be an image of me? No. So the image of me out here is seen because it's illumined by light. We use that metaphor. Just as the external image is seen because it's illumined by light, in the same way the mental image, the mental form, is not seen, let's say experienced. It's experienced because it's illumined and not by light. There's no light bulb inside here. Illumined by what? And this is a metaphor we use frequently in Advaita Vedanta. And note, it's a metaphor. It is as though illumined by consciousness. And we use that particular metaphor because it's quite clear that the image of me is known to you. The image of me is in your mind. You are observing the image of me by your mind. You are a conscious being. As a conscious being, how can you know the image of me in your mind? You know because you are the source of revelation. You are the source of illumination. You, as a conscious being, you reveal the presence of mental objects in your mind, including the image of me. So we use this metaphor. The consciousness, which is your essence, your essential nature, that consciousness reveals the presence of that image in your mind, illumines the presence of that image of your mind. Now, notice what we're doing is combining logic with experience. We're analyzing this very ordinary experience of knowing what you see and trying to understand how does that take place. And this is a remarkable discussion. And this analysis that we've just gone through is a remarkable analysis. And it's not that Shankara made this up. This is how the ancient rishis think of these. I can't say think of these guys because some of the rishis were female. So think of the ancient rishis 2,000, 3,000 years ago, sitting down and asking the question, how do I know what I'm seeing with my eyes? And note that they didn't have access to all our modern philosophy and modern science and modern understanding. They were on their own. They were path breakers. We call them margadarshis. They were discovering the path that we're following now, and what we're trying to do is walk in their footsteps, so to speak. Okay, so in this way, we want to see one more verse today. So I'll summarize this verse. Just as you see, you know the presence of Rahu indirectly by seeing the shadow on the moon, just as you know the moon indirectly from its reflection in the water, in the same way, you know consciousness indirectly through your experience of mental activities, like the image of me in your mind. But anything known to you in your mind, from that ordinary experience, you know something about consciousness. And what you know about consciousness is it metaphorically shines. It illumines. You are that consciousness illumining. So that tells you that consciousness has this property of illumining, shining, revealing. So that's what you know. The fact that thoughts are known to you means they've been revealed to you, illumined by you. So there's this property, we'll call it consciousness, has a property of illumining or shining based on the logic and experience that Shankara has used in the first half of this verse. Let's see, he continues now in this next verse. Bhanor-bimbam yatha chaushnyam, Bhanor-bimbam yatha chaushnam, Jale drishtam na chambasaha, Jale drishtam na chambasaha, Buddhau bodho na taddharmas, Buddhau bodho na taddharmas, Tathaiva syad vidharmataha, Tathaiva syad vidharmataha. Okay. A question for you. I can adjust this. Is it too loud or too weak?
It was loud. I just lowered it.
You lowered it. Okay. Because otherwise I can turn it up here. Okay. Thank you. So this is now Shankara really driving this point home. That here, suppose the Purva Pakshi makes a subjection. And he says, suppose the moon, oh, that's going to be way abstract. I have to edit myself here and try to stay grounded. You know what? Here's what I'd like to do. Cut our class a little short today for this reason. It'll give us a chance to see this particular teaching a second time and then make this transition to the next verse. I thought we would see the next verse today. I think our next class will be so much more powerful if we cut short a little bit today. When we meet next week, we'll return to the first half of this verse, and then we'll proceed to the following verse. I think it'll be much more powerful if we do that. This is such an important teaching. I think it deserves a little more time, and we're kind of out of time. So we'll conclude a little bit early today. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschya dukkha bhag bhavet, asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. All right.